I keep finding myself in the position of offering, this as an example of one of the virtues of Davidsonianism, and people saying, Davidson can't really say that. Davidson is a realist like I am. And then I quote you about how you don't have to be either a realist or an anti-realist. And they say, yeah, I know he says that, but really he shares my basic intuitions, and you don't because you're a relativist. And I don't know what to do at that point.
Yeah.
I don't think you have any of these things called realistic intuitions.
No, I don't.
That people pride themselves on.
Right.
And the lack of such intuitions is what's supposed to make you fall over this cliff into this thing called relativism. At least I'm always told that's what I've done. But I've never been able to sharpen up the issue in a way that gets past the usual rhetoric.
No, I agree with you about realism and anti-realism. I don't. I mean, aside from very special cases of the sort that Dummett sometimes says is all he's interested in, namely, are there really quarks or something like that? Well, that's a perfectly good question. It's a scientific question as far as I'm concerned. Well, anyway, I think we see eye to eye on the question of realism, and maybe in the case of relativism, it's seldom a clear doctrine.
Yeah, I'm not sure there is any doctrine in the area. I mean, the people whom I get grouped with, Derrida, for example, are people who say, they just go on endlessly against correspondence, representation, and so on.
Right.
I mean, it's the only string they have to their bow.
Right.
And they jazz it up a bit, but I can't see. I don't know what they've done wrong, and yet there is this. I mean, you share this feeling that there's a sort of intellectual current around that is a bad thing.
Well, yes, but the kind of thing that I read constantly is somebody says, well, so and so maintains this, somebody else maintains something that is clearly contrary to it. Now, why should we say that one is true and the other false? They're both true. That if that's not explained, and now I really do read this in serious places quite often.
I guess I read the same thing and try to construe it sympathetically by saying that what they're doing is saying, I am following the time-honored technique of clearing up an apparent contradiction by making a distinction. And
well, if they said that, or even tried to clear it up, but they seem to think it's perfectly okay to just rest it there, because nobody believes in truth anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, 9 times out of 10, it seems as though they're simply confusing being true with what a lot of people think is true.
Perhaps, yeah. Yeah,
I'd say some serious historian, very recently read this, I think, in one of these things I read, said, now in each period, of course, we have to, we revise the truth about history. Don't they revise what we think or what we say, but revise the truth.
Mm.
Now, you're sympathetic, and I am not.
I guess I regard it as trivial carelessness on the historian's part, rather than a symptom of something that affects the culture. I mean, let me change the subject.
Yeah.
I was wondering what you thought about this Goodmanian trope, there is no way the world is. Does that have any appeal, or does it?
Well, if it means, which is what I think it means to him, there's no one right vocabulary, there's no one right way of describing things. Of course, I completely agree. In fact, we have many different ways, and there could be more.
I think accepting that point leads me back to one of the things I've always had trouble with in your work, your attitude toward the fact of the matter, no fact of the matter distinction. I mean, there are times when you seem to take it as seriously as Quine and Dummett do. There are times when you seem to sort of brush it aside. I guess I find it more coherent with most of your views to brush it aside and say, since there are umpteen ways of describing every situation, does it profit us to distinguish the ones where two describers are arguing about fact and the ones where the two describers are just saying, it's convention, or it's, it isn't a matter of fact. And my inclination is to say, what we have are people saying different things in response to the same stimulus. It is for the sociologist of inquiry to tell us, when it is useful, when it is useful for them to dispute in certain ways, to bring certain considerations to bear. When it is not, it is for them to decide what issues they can wave aside, what issues they need to pursue further. When the philosopher comes along and says, in the manner of Quine, when it's temperature scales, when it's translation, no fact of the matter, this strikes me as, I don't see what the pragmatic import of that remark is.
Well, I guess I'm somewhere in between. The cases where I think there's no fact of the matter are cases where, so to speak, it's provable. It's provable that there's no fact of the matter. If I say the temperature is 20, and you say, but on what scale? I say, no, never mind the scale, I just say it's 20. I say, no, there's no fact of the matter. There's no fact of the matter whether the temperature is Fahrenheit or centigrade. There's no fact of the matter. Now, I think Quine's indeterminacy of translation should be viewed in exactly that way.
I have trouble seeing what that way is. I mean, my attitude toward the guy who says more, what scale are you using?
Exactly.
My attitude toward anybody who says something I'm not immediately prepared to accept and run with is tell me more.
Fine.
And when it's, when I'm told in one case I'm being asked for a convention, in another case I'm asked to pursue a question of fact, I can't see how I know which I'm being asked to do.
Well, I think the cases where there's no fact of the matter are few. If two people argue about whether it makes sense to say that the sun rises, for example, I think there's no fact of the matter.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and there are people who did argue about that, right? And in fact, is it Jerry Footer or, oh no, it's Chomsky who constantly uses this as an example. Chomsky constantly gives us an example of people who simply don't know what the truth is. These people are back where it's like, believing what Quine and I believe about language, Chomsky says, is like believing that the sun rises. the sun doesn't rise. All right? The Earth just goes around. Now, I'd say, no. It's a bad example. Maybe he's right about quantum me, but it's a bad example. The sun does rise.
Maybe we could talk a bit about how you see the course of philosophy in the century. I have, in my own stuff, wobbled back and forth between saying, the linguistic turn and/or analytic philosophy was a great step forward, and saying, oh no, it was just sort of, Kant warmed over with language stuck in place of consciousness, experience, thought, and we had to go through the same dialectic, only doing it in terms of language. And